Hi, and welcome to the Story of Cooking. I'm Sarah Nicholas. Hi, and welcome to the Story of Cooking. I'm Sarah Nicholas. This show explores people and their unique story of cooking. This will be a historical journey as well as a culinary experience. Each episode, we're going to look at a different story and how you can create that in your own kitchen. You don't have to be a 4-star chef, but you have to have a passion for cooking and a love for history, and you can create this story in your kitchen as well. Today, we're going to be looking at something very exciting. In fact, it's called the 2 most exciting minutes in sports. You guessed it, it's the Kentucky Derby. So we're going to be making 3 Kentucky Derby dishes. The first one is going to be a Kentucky bourbon burgoo. The second one is a pimento cheese toast. And lastly, we're going to make Kentucky bourbon pecan bread pudding. Notice the theme, a lot of bourbon. Of course, we're in Kentucky, so you would have had a lot of bourbon. So we're going to get started with the stew. It takes the longest. So we will add oil to the pan. Make sure your pan's hot. And we're gonna add our meat. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna brown all of our meats. So burgoo actually has a sordid history. People do it different ways depending on where you are. It's also referred to as roadkill stew because people would add things like venison and squirrel and bird, or whatever was available. It's originally said, well, there's several places it supposedly originated. One of them is in the bluegrass state. At work camps, they would make this stew in a big cauldron for all the workers. That's one theory. I'm sorry, I added pork shoulder, and now I'm adding chuck roast. About 1.5 pounds of each. And lastly, we have dark meat chicken. Love dark meat chicken, has a lot of flavor. It'll be really flavorful in this stew. So you can see it's a really meaty stew. Just perfect. So you just want the meat to brown. Use a big pot because it's a lot of stuff going in here. And again, you can use whatever you want. You can use just one meat and add more meat. You can use steak, you can use pork, you can use chicken, you can use venison if you like to hunt and have some venison. Whatever you want. That's what's the beautiful thing about this stew. Whew. All right, let that brown for a second. Another theory of where burgoo came from is pretty interesting. It dates back to the Civil War. General Morgan, Confederate General Morgan, in 1860 had a chef. His name was Gustave Joubert, and he was French, obviously, if you can't tell by the name. And he decided that he was going to make this stew for General Morgan. And he put bird in it, but he had such a thick French accent that when he said burgoo, or when he said bird stew, it came out sounding like burgoo. So some people think he's the father of burgoo, even though he didn't intentionally do so. So, I think that's a pretty interesting theory. All right, this meat looks like it's browning, so we're actually gonna take this meat out and then brown our vegetables. It's important to brown your vegetables and your meat because you're getting a lot of flavor out of that. And a lot of fat too. Sorry, struggling a little bit here. Good grief, I put a lot of meat in there. This is not for people that are vegetarians. Have to love meat for this. Okay. Last few pieces. Then we're gonna put in our vegetables. So we have a cup of okra into the pot. Oh, I missed a piece of meat. Let me grab that out of there before I brown the vegetables. So there's some okra. Here's some celery going in as well. Cup and a half celery. Cup of carrots. Lots of veggies too. Lots of veggies, lots of meat. About a cup of red pepper. Cup of green pepper. And about a cup of an onion. This is also something you can do differently too, depending on what kind of vegetables you like. I kind of like these vegetables because they add color and they taste really good together. The last thing you're going to add while you're browning your vegetables is the centerpiece of this dish, the Kentucky bourbon. Let that cook down a little bit. It's really important to have the Kentucky bourbon in your dish if you're making a derby recipe. Okay. All right, you're just gonna let those cook for a minute until the vegetables kind of soften and the bourbon kind of cooks down. You don't want your stuff too boozy. Let's season it a little bit. Pepper. All right. Now we're gonna add our meat back into the pot because that looks like it's cooked down enough. Gotta have some strength to make this meal. All right, meat back in the pot. That a quick toss. And see how chunky and delicious this stew is gonna be. All right. So just mix it all together. You can see this is gonna be a very chunky and delicious stew. So the next thing we're gonna add is a tomato puree. The broth will be kind of red when we're done. And then enough water just to cover the stew so it simmers while it's cooking. Hi and welcome back. We have everything ready for our Kentucky bourbon bread pudding. We're gonna start with the custard for the bread pudding. Take a bowl with a whisk and you're going to add 5 eggs into your bowl. So there's nothing more southern than bread pudding. And because we're doing it Kentucky Derby style, we're gonna add bourbon, Kentucky bourbon to the bread pudding. And we'll also finish it with a good sauce that also has bourbon. Bourbon butterscotch sauce. So the Kentucky Derby, I'll tell you a little bit about the Kentucky Derby. It's held annually every May. It's part of a series of 3 races, the Belmont, the Preakness, and the Kentucky Derby. The first one's the Kentucky Derby. The Belmont is held in New York. It's the last one, and the Preakness is in Maryland. So to the 5 eggs, we're gonna add our 1½ cups of sugar. And we're gonna whisk that together. Just till it's all mixed together. It gets a little lighter in color. You don't wanna beat it too much. Okay, set that aside for a second. We're gonna move on to our bread. And this is 1 pound of bread. Ideally you want a crusty bread and one that is stale, because the more stale the bread is, the more of the custard that the bread pudding will soak up, which makes it delicious. All right, so to the bread, we're gonna add 1/2 stick of melted butter and our 2 cups of pecans. I think I need a little bigger bowl. We'll make it work. Mix that together as best you can without losing all your pecans. All right, set that aside. Then we're gonna add the cream. 4 cups of heavy cream. All right, and again, our Kentucky bourbon, 3 tablespoons. And if you're worried about alcohol in your dishes, don't worry, it cooks out. But it still leaves that nice bourbon flavor. Okay, 3 tablespoons of Kentucky bourbon. and half a teaspoon of vanilla. If you have vanilla beans and can scrape out the beans of half of vanilla, that's better, but extract will work just as well. So we're gonna mix all of that a little bit. You can see how it's soaking up the juices. Perfect. All right, add our egg and sugar. Now, again, ideally this would sit for about an hour or so, just so it can soak everything up. You can even leave it in your refrigerator overnight. That makes it even better. It really, really soaks up stuff then. All right, so you can add things like raisins, cranberries, kind of a regional thing. I know in Virginia we always add raisins, but not in Kentucky. You can even add poppy seeds. It's also something cool to add, and it adds a little different look to your bread pudding, which is pretty neat. So talking more about the Kentucky Derby, another interesting fact is the Kentucky Derby actually was brought to Churchill Downs in Louisville, Kentucky by the grandson of Clark from the Lewis and Clark expedition. So that's a pretty interesting fact. That was in 1937. It's also called the Run of the Roses, another name for the Kentucky Derby because of the roses they drape over the horse when it wins. Okay, so that's all mixed together. Let's start on our sauce. So we're gonna make a boozy bourbon butterscotch sauce to go over top of this delicious bread pudding. So you want your heat about medium high. And into the pot, you're going to add brown sugar, corn syrup, try to get all the corn syrup, it'll really help it. And butter. 3 tablespoons butter. Let it cook until it's kind of dissolved in there. So I think everybody is familiar with the horse that won the Triple Crown. There's even a Disney movie about them. Secretariat won the Triple Crown with the fastest time of 1:59 seconds at the Kentucky Derby. Not many horses are able to win the Triple Crown. So it's a tough 3 races. Okay, so we're gonna let that cook a little bit. Once that's all dissolved, the sugar's melted, gets kind of thick, we're gonna remove it from the heat to finish it off. You don't want it to burn, so don't get the pan too hot. Because burnt butterscotch doesn't taste too good. Shouldn't take too long though. You can see it's already thickening up. Okay, let that go for another second. I have a greased casserole dish. While that's cooking, we'll go ahead and dump our bread pudding into the casserole dish. See how much moisture that bread soaked up? You need more moisture than you would think, too. All right. Okay, let's move this out of the way. Okay, this looks good, so we're gonna take this off so it doesn't burn. Okay. Once that cools for a second or so, we're gonna stir in our heavy cream and our bourbon. Heavy cream, so 1/2 cup of heavy cream, and 1 tablespoon of bourbon. Mix that together, and that's gonna be the topper for your bread pudding when it comes out of the oven. All right, so the bread pudding is going to go in a 325-degree oven for about an hour and a half, and it should be cooked all the way through, slightly firm and golden on the top. So I'm gonna clean up here, and when we come back, we're gonna finish our stew and make our pimento cheese toast. Hi, welcome back. We're gonna finish our Kentucky Bourbon Burgoo. Just make sure it looks like it's good to go, and it does. It's been going low and slow in the oven. Everything looks like it's cooked through. The meats are cooked through. The veggies are soft, so good to go. We have a few more things to add. We have some potatoes. You can use pre-cooked potatoes if you like. Makes it easy. We have corn. This is just frozen, thawed corn. You can use fresh, of course, which is always good. We have lima beans, my mother's favorite, going in. Getting thicker. And we have 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire. I add Worcestershire to like everything. I love it. It's so good. A pinch of salt. Some pepper. All right, let's stir all of that together. It's really thick now. You want it to cook for a little longer so all the potatoes cook through. They won't take long. The corn and the lima beans cook. So that won't be too much longer. All right, so let's just leave that there on low heat, simmering for 10 more minutes or so. While that's working, we are gonna start our pimento cheese toast. Pimento cheese in my family go way back. My mom loves pimento cheese. She would make us pimento cheese sandwiches when we were growing up. So it's really easy to make. Very, very easy to make. Get a big bowl so we can mix everything all together in one. I'm gonna start with a 1.5 cups of mayo. All that in there. Use good mayo. Do not use low-fat mayo. It will not taste nearly as delicious. And we have 1 4-ounce jar of pimentos, diced and drained. And we have 2 different kinds of cheeses. Very important. We have sharp cheddar and extra sharp cheddar. And then lastly, we have Worcestershire. Again, I love Worcestershire. Worcestershire, however you pronounce it. 1 teaspoon of grated onion. And for an extra kick, red pepper. 1/4 teaspoon of red pepper. I'm gonna mix all of that together. That's all it takes. Very simple, but very, very good. So the Derby is also very special to my family. That's why I was interested in doing a Derby episode. We watch the Derby every single year. No matter what we're doing, where we are, we have to watch the Derby. In fact, one of my favorite memories is being at my grandmom and granddad's house in Mount Solon, Virginia. They had a big pool and all the cousins would get together and always go swimming every day in the summer. We were certainly in the pool in May when the Kentucky Derby was going on. But it didn't matter. If we were playing in the pool, whatever, my granddad would get probably his 2nd glass of scotch he had in a year, call us all in, wet swimsuits and all, to sit down in front of the TV and watch the Kentucky Derby. So that's definitely a very vivid childhood memory of mine. We always had pimento cheese on sandwiches. Okay, so that looks like it's incorporated. Next we gotta cut our bread. Sometimes we were even at the beach. My parents have a beach house down in the Outer Banks in North Carolina. And a lot of times we'd be at the beach and we would watch the Kentucky Derby, because again, Granddaddy could not see the Kentucky Derby. And we'd always go with our friends Becky and Lindy. And Becky's a bit of a gambler. She loves to gamble. So she would always take the bets and we would sit and watch the Derby and eat a steamer pot out on the porch of, wherever we were staying. And it was just a lot of fun. And there was always mint juleps. Because if you don't know what a mint julep is, it's bourbon, simple syrup, and mint. So very Kentucky. Okay. So this toast ideally would be toasted. But for today, we're just gonna pretend it's toasted. Got a few more pieces. You can use whatever bread you want, just something crusty. And just gonna put it on the toast. So ideally, again, you would toast this. Be very, very simple. Just pop it under the broiler for, just a minute or so, just to get it nice and toasty and crispy. Just adds for a better If you're calling it toast, it needs to be toast, right? Still delicious either way you go. So good. My mom would be proud. This looks really, really good. My mom liked to put a lot of weird things on bread. This has nothing to do with the Kentucky Derby, but it's just kind of an interesting fact, and people always look at me like, what did she do? We used to have pimento cheese, always pimento cheese sandwiches, and we would also have peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwiches, which is pretty disgusting if you think about it, but it was always something we ate in our household. I don't know if it's a Southern thing or it's a mom thing, but I preferred the pimento cheese. Last one. Looks pretty, right? You got your red, you got your orange, very colorful. Good, robust Southern appetizer. Okay. So let's take a look at this stew. Ooh, it is boiling. Give it a quick stir. Looks pretty good. Maybe let it go for another minute or so just to make sure those potatoes are cooked all the way through, but it looks delicious. Very colorful. A lot of colorful dishes going on here. A lot of bourbon, a lot of color. Makes for a good party. So the last thing we're gonna add in, more color, parsley. Stir that in. Makes it look even prettier. Kind of looks Christmassy. See, this is a festive stew for any time of year. All right, it looks really good. We're gonna let that go for another minute or so again, just to make sure the vegetables are completely cooked through. I'm going to clean up my space, and when we come back, we'll have all 3 dishes plated and ready for our Kentucky Derby. Okay, we're back and we have all of our dishes almost plated and ready to go for our celebration. The bread pudding has come out of the oven and it's looking great. It's got a nice golden crust to the top, but it's still soft on the inside, which is just what you want. So let's plate that. And this is, we can't forget our bourbon butterscotch sauce. You can drizzle, actually you can drizzle it over the top. Maybe I should have done that first. Drizzle it over the top of the bread pudding, but I like extra because I like the sauce. So I would drizzle it over the top and then drizzle it over the top of the plated dish too. I like a lot of sauce. Another really good way to eat bread pudding too is not with the sauce, but you make it, put it in a bowl and then drown it in whole milk. So good. All right, we have our pimento cheese already ready. Looking good. And our burgoo looks like it's done as well. So spoon that out. All the different meats, we have the chuck roast, we have the pork shoulder, we have the dark meat chicken thighs, every sort of vegetable under the sun, red peppers, green peppers, okra, potatoes, carrots. You can really put anything you want into it, obviously. It's gonna taste delicious. All right. So we have our 3 dishes. We have our Kentucky bourbon burgoo, full of meat, full of vegetables, very colorful. We have our festive appetizer, the pimento cheese toast, looking good. And then to top it all off, we have our bread pudding drowning in the boozy bourbon butterscotch sauce. Looks good, all ready for a Kentucky Derby celebration. Thank you for joining me on this chapter of the Story of Cooking. I'm Sarah Nicholas. I'll see you next time.